Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for the part that you just finished watching. Please leave any comments or keep a running commentary, whatever you need to do to communicate with us. And here comes the next part. It should be attached right here. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. We're now starting to kick into the gear that I want us to be able to stay in. The animation, the way the conversation is going process-wise, as a therapist, we're just now starting to have the real conversation. So dig in and go for it. Seriously. Mm-hmm. So keep going.
Okay. So Black Lives Matter. Okay. So when the Black Lives Matter thing happened as a result of Floyd being murdered, there was protests everywhere, and initially BLM, Black Lives Matter. I mean, how do you go against that? And it was frustrating initially to me because very quickly it became violent. There was rioting and looting, and I saw something very interesting. I saw that you could not say anything other than the confessional statement, Black Lives Matter. If you said, because all lives matter, Black Lives Matter, you can't, that's not good. You can't say Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, white lives, you couldn't do anything like that. All you could do is say the phrase. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't, then the mob swamped you. And that was really troubling to me. So what I did is I sat down and I wrote out about racism, 15 things, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to put it online in Facebook, and then I'm going to try to have a discussion. What was interesting to me is that I think I had 180 people interact, which is pretty big for a Facebook discussion. There was one guy from that was very clearly associated with Black Lives Matter, and we actually had a pretty good discussion. And he challenged me about whether or not Black Lives Matter, the organization, was different than the sentiment, because I think that people can get involved with the sentiment, of course, and as an aside, one of the things that I've done with people when this comes up is I ask the question, instead of saying yes, Black Lives Matter, but others do too, or whatever. I always ask the question, why would any life matter? Right. Mm-hmm. Why would any life matter? And that will get you into a great discussion. Yep, and it'll lead you to Christ too. So anyway, I think that our people are having a hard time trying to figure out. I'm not a racist, but apparently, if I say I'm not a racist, that proves I'm a racist. Yeah. And what is racism? Well, racism is and I'll stop here. Racism is stereotyping an entire group of people in order to demean them or discriminate against them. And if you don't do that, you're not a racist. But what's going on in our culture is into this undefined idea, racism, all this other stuff is dumped, and I think that our people are trying to figure it out, and we're not talking about it.
Yeah, that's good. The rage culture, it goes by different terms. It's along with the cancel culture. You can't say certain things. If you say certain things, you're mobbed.
Or lose your job.
Shut down. Oh, lose your job. You not only lose your job, they'll come after you economically and maybe knock at your door. It's really getting nasty. And to say all lives matter, that's a trigger point. Talking about the vaccine or a vaccine. Ooh, that's a nasty argument or discussion to enter into online. It really is. But I agree with you, Steve. Some would say, well, I can't be a racist if I'm a minority. For minorities are already looked down upon or held down, and so for a minority to speak to a majority in such a way that's demeaning is not racist because I'm a minority. Well, they don't understand the term of racism. But for us, we enter into these conversations about Black Lives Matter, not looking at the origins, because I think it's been co-opted to many degrees. The sentiment's good, but it's only good if all lives matter. But on the other side of the coin is Black lives don't matter, or I should say all lives don't matter. The argument on the other side is all lives don't matter if Black lives don't matter. Not that Black lives matter because all lives matter. I agree. Black lives matter because all lives matter, because we have all been created in God's image. And to see it in the Christian context or the biblical context, that all lives matter, born and unborn, no matter what color, no matter what sex, no matter what, that context right there helps eliminate or helps mitigate racism if you can see, and I don't know what the traction on that is, but people need to understand without being mobbed or pushed into a corner or demonized that, man, all lives do matter. And this is the reason, because God cares. He sent his only son to die for the sin of the whole world, those that will accept and those that won't, because all lives matter. All lives matter.
Yeah, I think honestly, when, we would talk about the issue, we have to, for us pastoral, we have to begin biblically. I love your question, Steve. Well, what makes any life matter? And I think another piece of this thing is what is everybody really after, right? We're after harmony. We want this racial unity. We want across the board, we treat each other with great, genuine respect. We want to be at the same throne worshiping together. In a sense, we're wanting heaven on earth in a Genesis 3 world.
A broken world.
In a broken world.
Broken
So,
world, yeah.
so what you have is you have
Paradise
a broken
and fallen places.
You have so if there's any place where racism should not be existing, it should be in the Sunday gathering. It should be with the corporate church. It should be with the people of God. I mean, the running comment in the South is the most racist time and segregated time in the land is 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings, right? That should not be the case. And part of the reason why our culture is longing for this unity is because they're longing for something they cannot have outside of Christ. Even if you go to Ephesians 2, which is one of the great unifying moments between two absolutely warring tribes of Gentiles and Jews, and Paul says he's brought them together under one new man, and his name is Jesus. Or 2 Corinthians 5, we regard no one any longer according to the flesh, right? We are a new creation. And so you look at all these issues and you think, okay, so why do all lives matter? Because we're all made in the image of God. How can there be any racial harmony in a broken world? It can only happen through Jesus. Because the ultimate end of that is Revelation chapter 7, where myriads upon myriads are gathered around a throne, every nation, every tribe, every tongue, all worshiping the Savior together, which is what the world is actually. So can't we just all get along? And Jesus
the answer is no, not yet.
And the answer is no, not yet. And sadly, it's not your best life now, it's your best life later.
Yeah, that's right.
So that leads you again. It leads you to the gospel, just like you said earlier, Steve.
Right. So I'm gonna go to the opposite side now, because we live in Roseburg, Oregon.
White bread Roseburg, Oregon is what I call it.
Yeah, and so we don't really have a lot of tension between, for instance, blacks and whites, but
According to our perspective.
exactly, yeah. So, but have I experienced racism on the opposite side? Have I seen it? Yeah, absolutely. In Chicago, where I went to school, I saw it probably for the first time when I was down in Dallas, 4 years in Dallas. There were numerous times that I saw it, and it was ugly, and it was terrible, and there was this one time where my roomie and we were in this apartment complex, and we got a knock on the door, and we opened the door, and there's the apartment manager, who is about 5'1" and kind of rotund, and he had thick Coke bottle glasses, and whenever he would talk, he would lick his lips. So he would, and he looked at us out of kind of a southern drawl and said, "I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, but I had to let him in. The people next door, I had to let him in. But we'll get rid of him as soon as we can. But the law says that we have to have them in. And all of a sudden, I realized he was talking about a black family with 2 little girls moving in next door to us. And I looked at my roommate. He looked at me. He was from Ohio. We're both white as white can be. We're Casper the Friendly Ghost white, you know. And Gary, I was just stunned. And Gary said, my roommate said, "Get out." And the guy backed away, and he said, "Get out now." And he was pretty angry. Turned around and walked out, and we slammed the door, and we stood there looking at each other, mostly because we hadn't seen it that much. And we decided at that point we were going to help that family move in, and we were going to adopt that family, and we were going to be over at their house. And that guy, the apartment manager, called us names as a result, and gave us a hard time. I'm saying that, does racism exist? Absolutely, absolutely. And wherever you see it, we should stand up against it. Absolutely. And I understand why somebody would say, "Hey, wait a minute, do Black Lives Matter?" You know, I get it. I completely get it. The problem is that there's so many other things tangled in right now to it. And part of the job of us as pastors is untangling and holding on to what's true and right and good, and saying that's sinful, that's evil, that's wrong, that's against the gospel. But also pulling the other stuff away and say that shouldn't be happening, you know. And I don't know if we do a good job of that yet.
I don't think we do. I don't think we've confronted the systematic way racism and economic inequality have impacted not just blacks, but minorities in general. And I've tried to do some reading recently from a radically different perspective. Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Zindi is an interesting book because he talks about how the founders of America were really, their basic philosophy was there were 2 different races, one superior and one inferior, and it's really interesting. But if you look at how the United States has acted in so many ways, the projects, for example, you know, well, it might have come out of a very an altruistic motive. We want to help people have a nice place to live. But what it did is it says, but you can only live here. You can't live there. I grew up in a neighborhood that was fully white until I was in my junior, senior year of high school, and an African-American family moved in down the block, and boy, you should have heard it, you know. Everybody, and for sale signs went up everywhere, you know, all over the neighborhood.
Where was that?
This was in Kansas City, Missouri, Independence, Raytown. And it was a very rapid moving out of the white middle class families. My dad moved because of a job situation, but we moved in that same time frame. But there is a real powerful history that, and I think I like the way you said that, Steve. We need to untangle these threads. Yes, Black Lives Matter. But so do those Latinx lives, and so do those Puerto Rican lives, and so do those other lives matter that have been discriminated against, not necessarily by design, but just by the way the systems are arranged. I do a lot of work with social service systems, and oh my word, if you had to, I don't think I could survive if I had to fill out the forms these people have to fill out.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely bizarre. You know, sometimes you're filling out 40 pages of forms for a $50 a month benefit. Well, again, why aren't people able to fill that form out? Well, there's some educational prejudice there. There's all this stuff, and I think it is our job as pastors to start untangling those threads and getting back to the basics that, yes, Black Lives Matter because all lives matter, because every person is a creation, a unique individual creation of God. That's where we start. And then the systems, you know, it just, It's like pulling threads on a sweater. Once you start, you better be careful because you might not end up with anything. But you got to find out where that one thread is that's truth, and then rebuild around that thread. And it's not an easy task.
No, it's not. And I think I just one of the questions. I mean, I want to push back a little bit on that some, and just ask some questions about where you guys see on this. But because inevitably, here's an example. If you begin the process, and there is such a thing as biblical reparations, if you begin a process of doing some reparations civilly and in the government, don't you then inevitably risk becoming racist the other direction? Mm-hmm. So let me give you an example. This is something I've been wrestling with. I mean, you guys know I'm involved with a lot of athletic stuff. And one of the things I find fascinating is in the realm of athletics and entertainment, there is no affirmative action.
Right.
And yet minorities thrive. Affirmative action was put in place primarily to repair something. And so in business, education, you name it. I mean, college admissions, you can look across the board. And so my question has really been, has that reaction, instead of giving equal access across the board, has that actually limited minorities? Because in places that they're allowed, they're and I say allowed, that's a bad phrase, but you get what I'm saying. There's no affirmative action. They just go, they work hard, they thrive, they're given equal opportunities. They're doing well. Yeah. But in other areas where it was now capped, if you will, that we got to hire a certain amount of minorities, they're not doing as well, and we're still fighting for them to have more. Yeah. So I'm wrestling with, like, when I think to myself, any system of government, and this would be across the board biblically as well. I get a man that comes to my church that's a minority. I had one recently. He's now a pastor up in BeOne, Washington. Mexican citizen, works hard to become a United States citizen, goes through the enormously economic task of getting that done through an immigrant lawyer. Takes him years to get it done. Godly man, called to the pastorate, preaches God's word with wonderful authority. I never one time thought of that guy as a Latino. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? And then when he felt called to a Latino area. It's what he wanted to be in. And BeOne, Washington is 50% Hispanic. And the Lord lands him in this little town just south of Seattle, and he is just preaching the gospel and using his Spanish and his English to be able to do this. And my point is, we never one time said, well, we better hire a Latino here. Yeah. No, I wanted to hire a called man. Mm-hmm. And so how do you see that? So, like, Steve, even the comment you made about the seeing the projects, and I totally get where you're coming from on that. My question is, does that stuff limit minorities when we should be pushing back to say, and because if you say, hey, let's not go with affirmative action, boy, you're going to talk about being looked at as a wacko. That's kind of, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a challenge, and building an equitable system for all is something that I'm involved in with some different organizations right now, and it is uncovering some implicit and internal biases that that I wasn't aware even that I had. And I think you're 100% right. We created a system that limited them in affirmative action and in identifying, well, you can live in this neighborhood. That's great. We want you to have this neighborhood to live in. And I think we limited that. I don't know what the solution is, though. Yeah. I don't think the solution is to elevate unqualified people to positions just because of a I could tell you, I've got horse thieves who ended up hanging from oak trees in Missouri. That makes me a persecuted minority, right? Because, some of my uncles didn't have the chance to raise their family because they were horse thieves. Yeah. Well, that's absurd, yeah. But where does that end? And that's the challenge, when you start talking about equity, where does it end? How do you create that system? And I don't know, I don't have any answers because I'm with you. I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, one of the things, just real quick, let me jump in just real quick. When we start wading into something that's going to have this many details and specifics, I think we can look at this as like a kind of a preview And what I would want to propose is we dedicate one whole podcast thing to this, but we get information out ahead of time so that we can have like a basis of information.
Sure.
So I'm not trying to cut this off,
No,
but let's, if we're going to really start diving into some of this, I do have folks that I want to bring in who are, people of color and who are well educated in this in this arena. So that's in the future. We're going to come back on this anyway.
Good. Yeah.
So keep going with what you're doing. But from my perspective, I'm going, we're going to flag this one, and we're going to come back and spend some time on this.
Yep. Good.
So I'm keeping notes. And another point of reference for anybody listening, any references made to books or things that are posted, please get them to me, and I'll make sure they are attached to this so that people can reference any books that are mentioned, like Steve mentioned a book. Thank you so much for joining us. We would really appreciate to hear your comments or any kind of questions you might have. Please, whatever format you're looking at this in, take a look for where you can leave us a comment. We would love your feedback. Be on the lookout for the next part. It should be attached right here. And thank you so much. May God richly bless your day.